Today we're going to be looking at law of cosines. So theorem 411, law of cosines. If triangle ABC has length A, B, and C, and the sides opposite the angles with measures A, B, and C, then A squared plus A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine A. Likewise, B squared equals A squared plus C squared minus 2AC cosine B. And finally, same goes for C. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at example 1. So I want to find the value of x to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to start off with using my law of cosines. So I have that this right here is 44 degrees. I have opposite that, that's going to be x. I have my two sides. So one of my sides right here, side B, small b is 2.9, small a is 0.9. So let's go ahead and start writing out the formula. So c squared, so that's the one that's x, equals a squared. That is the 0.9 plus b squared, that is the 2.9, minus 2ab cosine c. And cosine c is 44 degrees. So plug in what we have. So we don't know what small c is. That's going to be x squared equals 0.9 squared plus 2.9 squared minus 2 times 0.9 times 2.9 cosine 44 degrees. So let's multiply all that out. So this gives me x squared equals 9.22 minus 2 times 0.9 times 2.9 gives you 5.22. So 5.22 cosine 44 degrees. Now I want to figure out x. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So this gives me x equals the square root of 9.22 minus 5.22 cosine 44. And when I type that in my calculator, I get out that x is about 2.3. So this right here is 2.3. Let's go ahead and take a look at example 2. So again, we want to find the value of x. This time it's going to be an angle. So we have all of our sides. So we have P, we have M, and we have N. So this is small p, this is small m, and this is small n. So we're going to use the law of cosine, so p squared equals, and we're using p squared because we want to find the angle that's connected to p. M squared plus n squared minus 2mn cosine, and then again p. Plug in what we know. So small p is 9 squared, m is 5 squared, n is 11 squared, minus 2 times 5 times 11, and then cosine of x. We don't know what angle p is, so that's going to be x. So square all these out, add them up. This gives me 81 equals 146 minus 110 cosine x. We need to start getting this by itself, so I'm going to subtract 146 from both sides. It gives me negative 65 equals negative 110 cosine x. Divide by 110. Divide by 110. Double negatives turn into a positive, so this gives me 65 over 110 equals cosine x. Now I need to get x by itself, so I'm going to take the inverse of cosine. So this will give me the measure of angle x, which is p, we know, equals cosine inverse of 65 divided by 110. And when we type that in, we get out that x is about 54 degrees. So that means the measure of angle P equals 54 degrees. Because x was standing in the place of angle P. Let's take a look at example 3. So we got our golf course here. We want to find the distance on our golf course between the ball and the hole to the nearest yard. So we got that this right here is x, this right here is 261.5, this is 378. So opposite this angle, this is our x. So this is going to give me x squared equals, so we're going to square these and add them together, 261.5 squared plus 378 squared minus 2 times 261.5 times 378 cosine, and then that's 32. So square all this out. That gives me x squared equals 211,266.25 minus 197,316 cosine 32. So take the square root of all that. So that gives you x squared, or sorry, not x squared, we're taking the square root. So it's going to give me x equals the square root of all this stuff, 211,266.25 minus 197,316 cosine 32. And when I take the square root of all that, I get x is about 210. So from the ball to the hole is 210 feet. Let's take a look at example 4. So example 4 has got a little bit of work to it. So solve a right triangle, a non-right triangle with the law of cosine. So we want to solve triangle ABC round to the nearest degree. So if we take a look at this, to figure out if it's a right triangle or not, you go 7 squared plus 8 squared, and we want to know, does that give me 11 squared? And it does not. It does not give it to me. So that's how we know this is not a right triangle. So now we want to start figuring out what our different angles are. So we're going to start off with angle A. We're just going to start off with that one. So that means that we're going to use 7 squared equals 8 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 8 times 11 cosine A. A lot of talking, but let's see what it looks like when we write it out. So that gives me A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine A. So that's what I was talking about. Plug in my values. This gives me 7 squared equals 11 squared plus 8 squared minus 2 times 11 times 8 cosine of A. A's are unknown. Square it all out, 49. Add what we can add together, 185 minus 176 cosine A. Subtract 185 from both sides. That gives me negative 136 equals negative 176 cosine A. Divide both sides by negative 176. Since I'm dividing a negative by a negative, that turns into a positive. So now we're going to get 136 over 176 equals cosine of A. And so to find angle A, I'm going to take the inverse. So angle A equals cosine inverse of 136 over 176. So the measure of angle A equals 39 degrees. So that means this is 39. Now to figure out the measure of angle B, I'm going to have to use what we've done previously. So I'm going to use the law of sine. And the law of sine says that sine A over A equals sine B over B. Not big B, little b. Plug in. So that gives me sine 39 that I just solved for over 7 equals sine B, which is what I'm solving for, over 11. Cross multiply this up. This gives me 11 sine 39 equals 7 sine B. Now divide both sides by 7. So this gives me sine B equals 11 sine 39 over 7. And again, I want to solve for the angle, so I'm going to have to take the inverse. So the measure of angle B equals sine inverse of 11 sine 39 over 7. So the measure of angle B equals 81. Okay, so I got A, I got B. Let's just figure out C, and to figure out C, we're just going to go back to old reliable, 81 plus 39 plus C equals 180 degrees. Triangle sum theorem. It's been working for us, let's just keep using it. So when I add these two together and subtract from both sides, that's going to give me 140 plus C equals 180. So C equals 40 degrees. So those are our three angles. So it did take a lot of work for us to find it, but we were able to find it, and that's the important part. All right, let's take a look at our next example. So this one, we start off with a right triangle. So we don't have to find that third angle. We have a right triangle already. So I want to find that missing side. Well, I noticed that I have a leg and I have a leg. So to find that missing side, I'm just going to use Pythagorean's theorem. So this gives me a squared, or not a squared. It would be if it was full Pythagorean, but we're going to cater it to the problem that we're working on right now. So because we're catering it to the problem that we're working on right now, I'm not going to use the normal a squared, b squared, c squared. I'm going to use g squared plus f squared equals h squared. So g squared plus f squared equals h squared. So plug in what we have. So g is 3 squared. F is 2 squared. H is what we're solving for. We're solving for h. So 3 squared is 9 plus 4 equals h squared. So that gives me 13 equals h squared. So we got two versions of this. The square root of 13, so h equals the square root of 13, or if we want to have an approximation for it, 3.6. So we're going to use that square root of 13 to help us find something else. So now let's find the measure of angle F. So let's find angle F. So to find angle F, again, I'm going to use cosine because I know that this is the square root of 13, or in easier terms, 3.6. So to find angle F, I'm going to use the law of cosine. So I'm going to say F squared equals G squared plus H squared minus 2GH cosine of F. So in this case, I'm going to use the square root of 13 in my numbers. So this is going to give me 2 squared equals the square root of 13 squared, which is just 13, plus 3 squared, I think I flipped them, minus 2 times 3 times the square root of 13 cosine f. I did flip them, sorry. Let me fix that so that way you can see where everything lines up. G is 3 squared. This is going to be square root of 13 because that's what h is. So that gives me 4 equals 22 minus 2 times 3 times square root of 13 is 6 root 13 cosine f. Subtract 22. That gives me negative 18 equals negative 6 square root 13 cosine f. Divide by negative 6 root 13. Divide by negative 6 root 13. Negative negative turns into a positive, so we get cosine of f equals 18 over 6 root 13. Inverse of cosine will give me the measure of angle f. So cosine inverse is 18 over 6 root 13. When I put that in, I end up getting 34. So I have that f equals 34. I have that h 90. So to find measure of angle G, again, I'm going back to old reliable. And old reliable is triangle sum theorem. So 34 plus 90 plus G equals 180 degrees. So that gives me 124 plus G equals 180. So G equals 56 degrees. So that's going to be 56 degrees. So again, you could solve it using ideas that we learned, but why not use what we learned in the past? So this is log cosine. Go ahead and write a summary for log cosine and then use these problems to help you out today.